When a killer is finally captured, the communities in which they were lurking give a sigh of relief knowing that the monster will never get the chance to take an innocent life again. Well, in this case, those living in the nearby community were lulled into a false sense of security when a sexual deviant and brutal murderer managed to escape police custody. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, take a moment to comment below where you're watching from, then don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification button so you never miss another gripping unknown crime story. Legere, a man dubbed the Monster of Miramichi, who escaped prison after murdering an elderly man during a robbery and then went on the run for 7 months in which he continued taking innocent people's lives. Allan Legere was born on February 13th. In 1948 in New Brunswick, Canada, Legere had a troubled childhood with a father who was mostly out of his son's life before eventually abandoning the family entirely. This meant that he was raised by his mother in poor conditions. In fact, he was forced to sleep in a single room with his sisters, which began his life of sexual deviancy. Legere once admitted that it was in his household where he used to masturbate to his sisters getting undressed, which evolved into him spying on other women through the window and masturbating. From a young age, Legere showed that he wasn't exactly a people person, reportedly showing antisocial behavior outside of the house. Another factor that could have contributed to the downward spiral of Allan Legere was that of his brother, who was also his best friend. He was hit by a truck and killed while the two were in their teens. To add one ingredient to the recipe of disaster after the incident, Legere's own mother told him that it should have been him who got hit by the truck and not his brother. Legere was a tall and muscular man and a big fan of working out, which helped him in his job as a mechanic. Although he had a good job and took pride in his physical appearance, Legere lacked social skills. Let him do a life of seclusion, eventually living on a farm. Legere would make friends but with the wrong type of people, and soon enough he became a petty criminal. A lack of social skills, a twisted sexual deviancy, and a habit of crime just isn't a good mix. And in the case of Allan, these driving forces coaxed him into a spree that would not just shock the region of Miramichi, but the whole of Canada. On the night of June 21st, 1986, Legere and two friends, Todd Matchett and Scott Curtis, robbed a convenience store in Black River Bridge, New Brunswick. After cutting the power, the thieves broke into the store and were met by the owners, an elderly couple, John and Mary Glendening, not letting the couple get between them and their stolen money. The trio savagely beat the couple up before taking sexual advantage of Mary. When the poor woman eventually regained consciousness, she discovered that her husband had died from his injuries. Frightened, in pain, and distraught, Mary managed to crawl up the stairs and rein the police. Despite leaving the crime scene, the police tracked the three down and arrested them. Matchett pleaded guilty to murdering John Glendening and brutally beating his wife. While Curtis and Legere were convicted at trial, while this would be the end for most killers, Allan Legere came up with a way to deceive the authorities so that he could have a second chance to spill blood. While being kept in a segregation unit in Reno, Legere established a good relationship with the staff. Warden Don Wheaton later commented that Legere had a Jekyll and Hyde personality. On May 3, 1989, unarmed guards escorted Legere to the hospital in Moncton due to an ear infection. Unbelievably, Legere managed to convince the guards to allow him to use the toilet unsupervised. Well, an egg was left on the officer's face when they discovered the prisoner had picked the locks on his handcuffs and leg shackles. After a few minutes, Legere left the bathroom, brandishing a homemade knife that he had hidden. The criminal burst out of the building and into the parking lot where he abducted Peggy Olive at knife point and drove away in her car. Luckily, Legere let Olive go without hurting her, an act that would become surprising when looking at the ammo of this monster. Legere's escape was followed by a string of violent assaults, robberies, and car thefts, crimes that Legere became a suspect for. On May 29, 1989, just weeks after Legere's escape, Allan's sisters-in-law, Annie and Nina Flam, who were 75 and 61 years old, were brutally attacked. To make things worse, Legere had set the Flames' grocery on fire in an attempt to hide any DNA evidence. It turned out that Legere had tied them up, beaten them, and taken sexual advantage of them before tucking the elderly women into bed and setting the room on fire. Sadly, while the firefighters managed to get to Nina in time, Annie Flam did not survive the ordeal. Fire investigators concluded that the intruder had deliberately set the home on fire to destroy the crime scene. Forensic investigators discovered hair and semen samples that they hoped could be tested for DNA evidence. Unfortunately, DNA testing was still in its infancy and didn't come up with any leads. The RCMP soon took over and saw similarities between the Glendening case and this latest double murder. Legere became the principal suspect, although there was no way of proving he was connected to the crime. On June 2nd, A worker discovered a pair of men's glasses at a site he was landscaping, which was very close to a house that had been burgled the previous night. It turned out that the glasses were identical to the ones Legere had been wearing when he escaped from police custody. With the police desperate to catch Legere following the horrendous crimes against Annie and Nina, the police offered a $2,000 reward for information leading to Legere's arrest shortly after police received several tips claiming that he had been seen in Fredericton and Toronto. Despite these tips, however, the authorities still believed that he was hiding in the Miramichi region. As the district continued to be hit by violent crimes, Legere's actions are truly sickening and show how his crimes were not just about financial gain but also sexual gratification. After a string of successful attacks and robberies while on the run, Legere was feeling invincible. On September 30th, 70-year-old Morrison Doran, who lived in Miramichi town, was shot in the back by an intruder believed to be Legere. The very next day, an armed assailant broke into another home, and this time it was Edwin and Evangeline Russell, who was viciously attacked by the cowardly Legere. 2 weeks later, on October 14th, a volunteer firefighter saw smoke coming from the home of sisters Linda and Donna Donnie, ages 41 and 45. The firefighter sent out a call for help and rushed to the burning house. The bodies of both sisters were found in the house, with one of them tucked into her bed. Both of the poor ladies had been beaten badly and taken sexual advantage of. Sound familiar? After further investigation, police drew many similarities to the Flam murder. What further connected things was the discovery that Legere had once been in a relationship with Linda Donnie. At this point, the police were growing even more concerned that similar vile crimes were yet to come. The people of Miramichi were equally worried as details of the crimes eventually began to circulate, especially among the elderly community who are the victims of choice for the heinous Allan Legere. A month later, on November 16th, Allan Legere carried out his final attack. At this point, the whole Miramichi community was terrified. Kids were kept indoors, Halloween was cancelled, and for the first time, residents no longer felt safe to keep their doors unlocked. Sadly, one door that wasn't left locked was the home of 69-year-old Father James Smith, who lived at the Blessed Virgin Mary Church. Taking the opportunity, Legere entered the church and crept around in the dark, looking for anything valuable to steal. Discovering a safe, the criminal thought it was his lucky day, but there was one major problem. Father Smith had heard the intruder. We don't exactly know what went on in that small room in the church, but what we do know is that only one man walked out of there that night, when the priest failed to show up for Mass one day. Suspicions were raised soon after his badly beaten body was discovered on the floor in another room, lying next to the open and empty rectory safe. Once again, Legere decided he would borrow someone else's car to make his getaway. As time went on, the reward rose from $2,000 to $50,000, but no one came forward to claim the cash and give information. This shows that Legere's antisocial behavior actually benefited him during this stage of his life, as he made no connections that would result in him being turned in for the hefty reward. On November 23rd, Legere hijacked a taxi at gunpoint and told the driver, Ron Gonk, to take him to the city of Moncton. Terrified, the driver carried on despite a storm drawing in. As the night drew in and temperatures plummeted, the icy roads became treacherous as the car sped down the road. Ron eventually lost control of the taxi after several near misses and plowed into a tall snowbank. Furious, Ron feared he would be shot there and then. Luckily, Legere's temper was quelled when he saw an approaching car that he waved down. This car belonged to Michelle Mercer, an off-duty RCMP constable. With Ron and Michelle being held at gunpoint, Michelle drove on, battling against the awful conditions. With both Ron and Michelle now at gunpoint, Legere repeatedly told Michelle to drive to Moncton in the blinding snowstorm. She lost her way and was forced to pull into a gas station to get her bearings and top up on fuel. Luckily for the kidnapped pair, Legere took his eye off the ball, and the two managed to escape the car, leaving the killer behind. Legere wasted no time in hijacking a transport truck and told the driver, Brian Golding, to take him to Moncton while he was on his way. However, Michelle managed to contact the authorities. Police quickly poured into the area, stopped the stolen truck and arrested the killer without a struggle. It makes me wonder how many more murders would have happened if Ron and Michelle didn't get away. More chillingly, it makes me wonder if Legere would have ever been caught at all. Because let's face it, he did have a knack of getting away. In August 1990, Legere was convicted on charges relating to his escape and was sentenced to 9 years. This was even before the trial for all of the murders began. By the time of the 1991 trials for the Flam, Donnie and Smith murders, the state-of-the-art DNA lab in Toronto was now in existence. In fact, Legere trial featured the first Canadian uses of DNA fingerprinting to convict a criminal. In November 1991 was convicted of all the murders he committed while he was on the run. It was in 2015 that Legere was transferred to a super maximum security penitentiary in St. Annes-des-Plaines before being moved to the Edmonton Institution in Alberta. In August 2020, Legere applied for day parole. As you can probably guess, after the horrors he unleashed the last time he got a taste of freedom, his request was met with a resounding no. But he wasn't done trying. A parole hearing was scheduled for January 13, 2021. Once again, the answer was denied, and for good reason. Authorities discovered a weapon hidden inside his cell's television. Even more chilling? They uncovered a plan for yet another escape. This time, he intended to take a hostage. If you ever find yourself in Fredericton, you can step into Legere's past. The city shut down its old jail in 1996, and by 1999, it had been repurposed into a science museum. One of its exhibits? Legere's very own cell now used to teach visitors about DNA fingerprinting, a grim reminder of the forensic science that helped bring him down. But here's the question that lingers. How many people did Allan Legere really kill? Officially, we know of his victims. But given the ease with which he tortured, raped, and murdered, particularly the elderly, could there be more cold cases tied to him? It makes me wonder. What if other notorious killers had escaped? What if monsters like John Wayne Gacy or Jeffrey Dahmer had broken free and continued their rampage? Just the thought sends shivers down my spine. And now I ask you, do you think there are other victims we don't know about? Should killers like Legere ever even get a parole hearing? What would be the worst-case scenario if another high-profile serial killer escaped today? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. If you love true crime and chilling mysteries, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Because in the world of true crime, the truth is always more terrifying than fiction.